Hey, how we doing? Welcome to Your Successful Retirement. I'm going to do a bit of a strange topic today, and I'm going to tell a lot of stories, not a lot of actionable items necessarily. I want to kind of perk your interest and kind of tweak some things to get you to thinking about something, because that's kind of like the first step. And I'll talk about why I'm doing that towards the end. But I want to talk about, I guess, late stage retirement planning when you get old. And old can be 65, old can be 102. It really depends. I have two clients right now. I think it's just two in their 90s. One of them is still very mobile. He's one of my favorite clients, Stan. He's awesome. Um, he was a bomber pilot in the Korean War. Very fascinating guy. He doesn't drive anymore. I think he's 92, 93. But he's still out there, still cruising along. It's You don't know when that's going to happen, but that late stage stuff is important to start thinking about. It may not be for you. It may be for an older relative, parent, aunt, uncle, whatever. There's a lot going on there, and it can come up fast. So I want to talk about it just so you're aware, and you can kind of start letting those ideas gel. And there's a reason for that. Uh, but I want to kind of start with a couple of just background from me is what I observed, because I was fortunate enough to watch my parents deal with their parents at a time that I was aware because of what I do for a living. So my dad's mom, my Nana, when my grandfather passed away, I was probably 14 when he passed away. And yes, at 14, I did know what I wanted to do with my life. I'm weird that way. I knew I wanted to do this my entire life. And that was difficult. They had a big house in Boston. At one point, there was 3 out of the 5 kids. There's 5 kids. My grandparents had 5 kids. 3 out of the 5 were living there. Maybe 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5 were 3 out of 5 were living there in that house. And slowly they got married and moved out. Grandfather passes away, and probably 2 years later, if not less, my cousin wound up. He was going to school in the area, and he had two buddies from high school that were going to the same school or nearby schools. And the three of them lived with my grandmother for 4 years, which was great. And it gave her the ability to stay there for 4 years because she couldn't take care of herself. She had never driven in her entire life. They could take her to the grocery store and hang out. And she was a funny curmudgeon, is probably the best way to describe it. She just, I was never sure if she was sarcastic or not. Um, One time I was probably 13, 14 years old. We were over her house. It was like me and my sister. Oh, she was over our house. That's right. She was over our house. It may have been Thanksgiving or Christmas. And the radio is playing and I'm singing along. And I, no word of a lie, my sister can attest to this. She says, Dennis, you should consider being a lounge singer. And I get all puffed up. I said, this is great. I should be a lounge singer. I said, really, Nana? She said, yeah, they can't sing either. That was my grandmother. I told that story to my cousin, the one that was living with her. He was appalled. I find it hysterically funny. It was a zing. I think she was serious, but she may have been just being sarcastic. You couldn't tell, but it allowed her to have those 4 years. And then my parents and the siblings sold Nana's house, and she had started out in senior housing, and that was a place where it was subsidized because of her income. My grandfather worked for the railroad. He got railroad retirement. Who gets railroad retirement anymore? Versus Social Security. He got railroad retirement, and she had a small amount of money saved up from the sale of the house. And that kind of led for a number of years until she was, too infirm and she had to go to a nursing home. But most importantly, there were 5 kids. And all of them lived within a half hour, 45 minutes of her. Some of them even closer. There was always somebody available to be with her or take her out or check in on her on a regular basis. That was a big deal. And that was kind of the family structure that she developed and grew up under. Now, my mom's mom, my mom's parents, my Mimi and my pops, they also lived in Boston. And we lived South Shore, probably a half hour, 40 minutes away. And Neither of them drove. Neither of them drove. Now, my grandfather was a Teamster. Think about that. He doesn't drive. Worked for Budweiser for many, many years, but he didn't drive. There was two guys per truck, and he was just never the driver. He had a license, he just didn't drive. So my mother was up there once every 2 weeks because she's an only child, taking care of them, bringing them. I remember as a little kid going up with her in the summertime. I loved this in the summertime. We'd go up, we'd go out to breakfast with my grandmother. Then we'd go to Stop and Shop. We would spend an hour and a half in Stop and Shop, and we get this cart covered in groceries just for the two of them because that was what they needed. Now there was a small grocery store and a corner store within a couple of blocks of their house. So if they needed a gallon of milk or a head of lettuce, there was no problem. But all the regular sundry stuff, the dry goods, the frozen goods, things like that, my mother would go up there, every other week and then have to go up to take them to doctor's appointments and things like that. It was a lot of work. So when my grandfather passed away, my parents at the time were living on Cape Cod in Falmouth. And again, my grandmother lives in Dorchester. And it's an hour and 15 maybe each way, maybe an hour and a half to get from one to the other up Route 3, which if you know Route 3 can be ugly depending on the time of day and the time of year, can be pretty ugly to get there. And within a couple of months of my grandfather passing, my mother promptly moves her mother to Falmouth, 10 minutes away from her house, in an apartment there, gets her out of the apartment she lives in Dorchester, moves her down to Falmouth because now she's 10 minutes away, changes the doctors. Everything's very convenient, and she can help manage my grandmother's situation. So I preface all of that because I'm in the middle of this with my parents. This is now 20 years later. My parents are in their 80s, and they still live on Cape Cod. They still live on Cape Cod. None of us do. Me and my sister live about 10, 15 minutes away from each other. We're an hour away. My brother lives in New Hampshire. Hey, Chris. He listens every episode religiously. And he's probably 2.25 hours away. Something goes wrong. It's not easy for us to get down there. And they just, there's this sense of autonomy that they're okay with that. And it's difficult. Last year, my mother had a health scare. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And between me, my brother, my sister, and my wife, we were down there, actually probably my brother-in-law too, down taking my dad to the hospital just about every day for 2 weeks for the four of us. That was a lot. It was a lot to deal with. And it was difficult. But my parents' view of the world is very different. We've talked about this on the podcast before, but my father grew up in a house that it was multi-generational. It was him and his siblings, his parents, and his mother's parents lived there. In addition, every Sunday, it was dinner over at Phil and Bud's every single Sunday. My mother tells stories of when she was first dating my dad. And when they first got married, she said, oh no, Sunday dinner was at your grandmother's house. Now, not everybody came every week, but they both came from very large families of 7, 8, 9 kids. And everybody descended on that house in Boston every Sunday. It was just that sense of family was a big deal. My parents, born in 40 and 42, were that, I don't know what that generation is between the greatest generation and the baby boomers. Is that the silent generation? Whatever it is, nobody talks about. Maybe it is the silent generation. That's why. They were the first people to get out. They wanted to get out for whatever reason. So they moved a half hour south into the burbs, big yard, quiet neighborhood. And that was very different than centuries, millennia of how people were living. Is getting out and getting that autonomy was very, very different. Humorously, about 2 years later, they weren't far enough away. And they moved to Buffalo, and that's where I was born. And 3 years later, it still wasn't far enough away. They moved to Cleveland. That was far enough away. We lived in Cleveland for about 3-4 years and then moved home. I've grown up in Massachusetts the rest of my life. But that sense of autonomy has stuck with them. So they thought nothing of when they retired. again, we're all up here off Cape and they're retiring to the Cape and they're an hour away and they don't care. That's fine. This is our life. That's your life. Is they're very protective of that, even to this day of your life is your life because that's how that's what they believe. And the funny thing is I've already reverted is me and my kids are ridiculously close. And that sense of closeness is a big deal for us. That sense of family that they don't have, and it's not right or wrong, but boy, that sense of autonomy affects everything. So it's last fall and my mother's got this problem and it's running all of us ragged to the point, I think at one point, me and my sister to tell my mom, look, we can't be here every day. We can't do this. We can't continue to do this. That there's a stopping point and we feel awful. She was in for probably 2-3 weeks, maybe a month back when I first got married. So 31 years ago, she had a spiral fracture of her leg and she was at Mass General Hospital for probably a month because they had to like set it and then leave it and let the swelling go down and then they could do the real surgery. So she was just stuck in this hospital bed for a month. The advantage was my dad and my sister, my little sister, worked in Boston. They saw her every day. They could go by at lunchtime. They could stop by after work and check in with her and then hopped on the red line, go to South Station, go home. I lived in Somerville. I lived literally 15 minutes away. Me and my wife would drive over once a day, one of us, and it was very easy. But Falmouth to the rest of the world is very difficult. And, you've got to kind of consider those things as you age and as you have relatives that age is who's going to take care of you. I don't mean whose house you're going to live in. That's not anywhere near what I mean, but who's going to help advocate for you? Who's going to sit there with the doctors or check in on you or make that phone call? It's important to have that safety system in place. I had a client a number of years ago, early in my career. They were in their mid 60s. They were a married couple. They were very happily married. They were great people. Gil and Jane, I loved them. They were single. I'm sorry, they were married. They had no children, never intended to have children. They lived away from, they were in one of those families that their generation spread out. And they didn't live really near any of the siblings they had. There was like one niece that lived somewhat in the area, like maybe a half hour, 40 minutes away, that they would see on Thanksgiving and Christmas. And that was the extent of it. And I remember dealing with this as we were dealing with their estate planning 25 years ago, whatever it was. And they had no support system at all and never thought about it, even though we mentioned it at the time. And eventually they both developed, and I didn't realize it, they both developed dementia. I found this out afterwards. And they just disappeared off the map. They stopped answering the phone. Then the answering machine got disconnected, so it would just ring and ring and ring. Mail came back undeliverable. And I eventually had to take my name off of their account of just, I need to step back and not be a part of this because I can't get a hold of them. It's not allowed. Is the SEC does not allow me to advise a client I can't talk to or communicate with, at least email, things like that. This was way before we were considering this. So it's like 2 years later, I get a phone call from an attorney she found some paperwork because one of them had passed away. The other was in a nursing home and they were trying to settle things. She said, yeah, it's been a number of years. They both had dementia and they lived alone and one of them passed away. And it was an ugly, ugly situation. And I just think of, oh gosh, they had nobody to advocate for them as they slowly devolved. There was nobody there to help out. And you want to start thinking about that. Again, whether it's you or somebody you love, you want to start thinking about that. If you're a child or if you have children, you need to start thinking about how close should I be living to them? And at what point? At what point is a good thing. I have a client, they live, the husband and wife live, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half from their daughter. And they keep toying with the idea of selling the house, which was, I think, his grandmother's house. It's a beautiful house, and moving to nearer to the daughter. Uh, and they keep debating it and considering it. And because their health is very good, and their health is very good, they take very good care of themselves. They've been reluctant to pull that trigger, but they're aware of it. You want to be kind of aware of these things, not because, again, they want to move in with the daughter. They want to be close to have somebody to advocate for them. So if you have kids, how far away are they? How are they going to advocate for you? If you don't, who's going to take in that role? And I don't know what the answer is. I have a client, again, no kids, unmarried, together with his spouse for decades. She passed away last couple of years, and he has a nephew, and that's about it. And the nephew's kind of stepped into that role, and the nephew lives in the same town as him, which helps immensely. Um, over the years, he's been close and far away and close and far away from the nephew. Now he's very close, and the nephew's really stepped up to help out and advocate for his uncle. So that's a big deal. Another issue you want to think about. And again, I'm just trying to rattle your brain with these things of letting these things feed. And I'll talk about why in a couple of minutes. What's your housing situation look like? Forget about if you have to move into senior housing, assisted living, nursing home. What's your home look like? And right now, again, I get a really good front row seat to people's needs in this area because of my job. Right now, I'm building a house. It's an adventure. It always is. It's not nearly as stressful as it was the last time I did this, which was 31 years ago. Still living in that house. And I love that house. I love that house. It's time for me to move on from the neighborhood. It's a young people's neighborhood. I'm not a young people anymore. I live on a cul-de-sac. Man, somebody deserves that house that has kids that will ride their bikes and things of that nature. It's time for that to happen. And you're starting to see that there's a turnover within the neighborhood. In addition, I'm looking and saying, look, do I want to move when I'm 56 or do I want to move when I'm 65? I don't want to move when I'm 65. You can see 31 years in the same house. I don't like to move. The older I get, the worse this is going to be. This is a good time. I have the resources. Let's build a house. Let's build the right house. So one level living. That's a big deal. Now we have a 2-level house. We're building a 2-level house just because of the aesthetics and how it looks. And we didn't want this. Now my youngest son still lives with us. And if we had tried to put everything on one floor, it would have just looked silly. So going up a floor and having his stuff upstairs made sense to make the house look nicer. But I can live on one floor. I think there'll be a grand total of 2 steps to get into the house when all the grading is finished. And they won't be consecutive. It'll be 1 step, move forward, and then 1 step into the house, no matter what, which my mother will be very happy. My mother has mobility issues at 82, 83, 82. And yeah, coming over my house now, it's 6 steps to get into my house. And my house is not built way up high. It's built kind of a bit high. I would have liked to, maybe it's one of those things when they built it, they could have brought in more fill. They couldn't have lowered it because the water table is too high. They couldn't have lowered it. Could they have brought in more fill? Yes, but I have a walkout basement in the back, and that would have affected how high that was. And we're stuck with these 5, 6 steps to get into the house. And my mother laments that every time she comes over. And I realize someday that's going to bother me. I also live in a cape. You know, a cape, which I don't understand this, but from the basement to the first floor and from the first floor to the second floor, it's 13 steps. I'm sorry. This is built in ridiculously Protestant, paranoid Massachusetts is where this house was developed. It is 13 steps. And I scratch my head every time I go up them. I go, why is this 13 steps? Why? What ding dong made this 13, not 12 or 14? In Protestant, conservative, God-fearing, the devil's out to get you Massachusetts at the time when these houses were quote unquote invented. But it is 13 steps for me to get from the living area to the bedroom area. And my bedroom is go up the 13 steps, go to the side of the house. And my bedroom is over the garage. Go down this hallway, and then I get into my bedroom. From my bedroom to the bathroom is probably a 35-step walk. It's a long way. That's not going to cut it when I'm 80. It just isn't. Is having things more compact and more convenient and all on one level is a big deal. So that's something to think about. I'm designing in the doorways. So the doorway from the living area into my bedroom, the doorway in my bedroom into my bathroom are going to be full 36 inch wide doors. Again, what if we have a wheelchair? What if one of us, for whatever reason, is infirmed enough to need a wheelchair and need to stay at home? Boom, that's something we've thought about and made sure we built into the design so that we can continue living there as long as possible. And the third thing is one of those zero clearance, the curbless showers. I had a client, gosh, this could be 20 years ago, that his wife was infirm. She had diabetes and then eventually just was in a wheelchair. And they converted on the first floor a laundry room into a full bathroom with a curbless shower. It's the first time I had seen it. It was 20 years ago. I'm like, isn't that fascinating? So sitting down with the architect and the builder and everything else, and I said, no, no curb. This will be a curbless shower. Really, I said, someday I'm going to be old and I want to make sure I'm taken care of now. It's very important to us. So all of those are issues you need to think about in your current living situation. And then the other area I have is my kitchen. My kitchen now is very small. It's functional. I can do everything, but there's no way to easily get around the island that we shoehorned into this house after it was built. There's no easy way to get in there. It's not very accessible. It's hard for two people to be in there. I should have a shirt or at least an apron. I don't wear an apron, but if I had an apron, I have this thing, Goomk, Goomk, that when family comes in for Sunday dinner at my house, when family kind of drifts to the edges of the island, I go Goomk, and Goomk stands for get out of my kitchen. It's very important because I need that space. There's not a lot of space there. The new kitchen has a lot of space so that if I need that space for whatever reason, needs more, mobility issues, things like that, I have the space to continue working in the kitchen and be able to work around that. So I want you to think about that in your current living situation or future living situation. How are you going to mitigate that? Is it going to be a set of ramps? It is going to be one of those chairs that goes up the stairs. How are you going to mitigate that? Is something you want to kind of start rolling in your head, because it's, whether it's for you or for an older relative, it's important to be thinking about those things. And I talk about all of this because here's what I haven't talked about, and I'm not going to talk about today. I haven't talked estate planning documents. What documents do you need to help protect you? Nope. Haven't talked about that at all. It's its own podcast. We haven't talked about the types of care that you might need, whether it's just senior living, assisted living, nursing home, at-home care. That's a whole podcast. I don't want to talk about that today either. We could talk about strategies to protect your assets from these expensive forms of care. It's a whole podcast. Don't want to talk about that today either. I want to develop this first step, because without understanding or having a knowledge of this, it's difficult to make those decisions on those other three topics. This is step one, and it's not a fun step, and it's slow, and it's quiet, and it's kind of like in the back of your head for a little while, and then it becomes clear. I was sitting down with a new client just this week, and it was funny because both times this came up simultaneously in the same meeting. We were talking about both estate planning and portfolio design. And I was going over the portfolio design, and they said, do you think this is a moderate portfolio? Conservative, moderate, aggressive? I said, that's the wrong question. And he kind of tilted his head and looked at me and said, what do you mean? I said, well, think of it this way. We can create a moderate portfolio, but that's the last step. What I want to see, based on your assets and your other resources, do you have sufficient assets and resources to retire successfully? That's step one. Step two is, what rate of return is required on that portfolio in order to make sure that happens? What's the minimum rate of return? And then step three, let's design a portfolio around providing that rate of return based on historic norms. Now I can determine if that portfolio is moderate or not, but not until we get there. There's a lot of steps before that. And we were talking estate planning, and she said, well, do we need a trust? And I said, it's the wrong question. Question one is, what do you want to have happen to your assets when you pass away? In extreme detail. And I start going through a bunch of different thoughts of just triggering it. I said, do you see how that's more important than the actual mechanism? I said, the difficulty with a lot of times people sit down with an attorney and they say, I think I need a trust. The attorney might spend 10 minutes trying to determine if they need a trust, and that's it. That's not sufficient time. You need time to go home and now let that rattle in your brain, let alone start talking about specifics of who's going to be in charge and who's going to be the beneficiary and all. Whoa, wait a second. And we bring a client through the financial planning process and talk about estate planning. That's how we deal with it, is we deal with from the macro and we start trimming it down. Same thing here is, I don't have any action plan today for you, except start thinking about this for yourself, for an older relative. Start thinking about, what's this going to look like 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? And you're not going to get a perfect plan. Don't worry about, okay, and then cousin Joe is going to do this, and little Billy is going to do that. No. I want you to think about this in concept. What would happen? Because things will change. I had a client years ago that in her 60s, she was volunteering at this nursing home, and she loved it so much. She said, someday I'm just going to be sick of cooking and cleaning and sitting around, and I'm just going to go into this nursing home and somebody's going to pay for it. That's a very specific goal and not a good goal. That never happened. The nursing home actually closed in the interim, but that was a very, 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 very specific goal. I would recommend not doing that. I'd recommend dealing with concepts. Think about these concepts. What do you want to do? What's it look like? I don't know what things are going to look like when I'm 80. In 25 years, I don't know what things are going to look like, but I want my house to be in the right enough stage that I have the maximum flexibility. And that's it. That's the extent of it. Which one of my kids is going to step up and help advocate? I don't know. I have 3 of them, and they love me dearly and I love them dearly. I know it's going to happen. I just don't know what it's going to look like. My son's 17. Who knows? He may, my daughters live 10, 15 minutes away from me right now, and they will live 10 or 15 minutes away from me in the new house. I'm not moving that far away. Who knows what 25 years brings, but I know I have 3 kids and I'm thinking about that. I'm not moving in with any of them. So if they're listening, I'm not moving in. I am not moving in with you. I wouldn't do that to you. So that's my call to action for the day. Think about this. It's the first step to kind of prepping all of this, and it's an important first step. If you have questions, jump down in the show notes, reach out, ask questions. We're here to help. If you need to sit down and talk about your specific situation, we're always happy to kind of take a look at things and see where we may be able to help you. All right. With that, that's it for today. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Remember, the views expressed are not necessarily those of Successful Money Strategies. All content is for educational purposes only and should not be construed as an endorsement of any third party or their views, or as a solicitation or offer to sell securities or provide investment, tax, legal, or consulting services. We believe the information presented to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed for accuracy or completeness. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Hypothetical returns do not reflect actual trading and may not be indicative of the performance of any specific investment. Always consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Additional information, including management fees and expenses, is provided on our Form ADV Part 2, available upon request, or at the SEC's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website, https://advisorinfo.sec.gov.